First, thanks for having me. The missile attack that happened in Erbil and in the Kurdish region was basically nothing more than Iran flexing its muscle, trying to identify itself as a leader in the region, using force, using violence, and targeting civilian infrastructure and civilians themselves. This is a very, very troubling situation that we're witnessing what's happening in Iran. Iran's doing this directly in Erbil. They're directly targeting uh, regional assets that the U.S. has in Syria. They're also using their proxies in antagonizing U.S. interests in places like the Red Sea, using the Houthi rebels and their targeting of commercial shipping. They've been using their proxies in Lebanon for targeting and exacerbating the situation between Israel and Gaza and Hamas. Uh, this is nothing more than Iran trying to show its power. But the reality is, all it's doing is provoking regional interests to go against Iran. And this recent attack in Kurdish region is going to be something that will also backfire on them. Well, as we've seen for the better part of more than a decade, is that international response to Iran's offensive and illegal actions does nothing to avert Iran from doing these type of aggressive actions. As far as the U.S. is concerned, they've used sanctions. Sanctions does not appear to be a deterrent to Tehran and Khamenei. It is the international community has done everything from calling out Iran on their illegal actions to also getting other allies involved in sanctioning Iran economically and strategically. What they're doing right now is that they're isolating themselves, but they're doing this in a bubble. What they're going to have to realize, and they're going to have to realize it soon, is all this is going to do is isolate them from the rest of the world, and it will ultimately not help their position as a strategic force in the region, but ultimately what it's going to do is reverse and ultimately become a hindrance to Iran's voice being heard in the regional community, as well as more economic sanctions are going to continue to hurt the Iranian people. So if they're trying to do it to help Iranian stance and help grow their people as a power, it's not working. Well, that's the big question that folks here in the United States, particularly with the Biden administration, and in particular President Biden and Secretary of State Tony Blinken, they're having to wrestle with that question right now. The problem that the Biden administration faces is number one, the long-term support that they've had for Israel in protecting their sovereignty and defending their homeland and protecting the civilian population of Israel against terroristic actions of Hamas's military arm. At the same time, the Biden administration has had to walk a very tight line regarding Israel and the conflict in Gaza because of the fact that there are pictures being distributed globally of dead civilians, particularly those of dead women and dead children. Those pictures are not helping the Biden administration in supporting Israel. I bring that up only because of the fact that Iran must be looking at this and seeing the tight support that the Biden administration publicly has been giving to Israel, but they're taking advantage of a situation, knowing the fact that the voice and the influence that the U.S. is having with our regional partners is coming into conflict because of the fact that we're seeing Iran now taking advantage of what they believe is a strategic situation of now targeting strategic U.S. Positions in Syria, and particularly looking at the attack in Erbil as being another provocation in questioning and bringing into focus the U.S. position in key areas like Iraq, Syria. Well, I think Iran looks at this opportunity, and this is a big question for the U.S. policy towards the Kurdish region, is the fact that the U.S. does not recognize Kurdish sovereignty and a independent Kurdistan, and that has been an issue. The wavering back and forth of support for the Kurdish people has been a problem for U.S. administrations, not just the Biden administration, but for previous administrations going back 20 years. Iran knows this. Iran is going to take advantage of this because that's what they do. They are going to see a slight crack in U.S. policy in a region that is strategically important to them. They know that the Kurdish people have, and in particular the Peshmerga, have supported U.S. efforts in defeating ISIS in the region. They take this as an opportunity of striking at Erbil and striking at the Kurdish people in retaliation for them supporting the effort against ISIS in the region, and that is how they're flexing their muscle. The hope now is that this attack is going to allow the U.S. to, in particular, revisit the question of how we view the Kurdish region, and this might be an opportunity to have the Biden administration look at the future of an independent Kurdish, Kurdish sovereign country. The reality is, we talk about here in the United States the two-state solution. The reality is there has to be a broader view of this, and anytime we talk about a two-state solution between Palestine and Israel, we have to also go back and revisit the idea of an independent Kurdish region, an independent Kurdistan. Well, we can hope. The reality is that the reaction of the U.S. government, in my opinion, has been lackluster. It's been very soft as far as the illegal and unprovoked attack of by the Iranians towards the Kurdish people in the Kurdish region. Iraq, as we've seen with the withdrawal of its ambassador from Tehran, feels like its sovereignty has also been called into question by this unprovoked attack. This is clearly an act of aggression that violates international law on many levels. It's an act of aggression that violates the UN Charter on many levels, where one sovereign country attacks another region in another sovereign country, and ultimately it is an illegal act because it is targeting and causing the loss of life on a civilian population. One hopes and one would think that the U.S. position on being the U.S. would take a more aggressive position in calling out Iran for this illegal activity, particularly with the fact that this is a very strategic area for the U.S., particularly with the possible expansion of conflict in the Middle East between Iran and Hamas, Iran and Hezbollah, and now the attacks, the unprovoked attacks on U.S. positions in Syria, U.S. interests in Kurdistan. The U.S. is going to have to take a much more aggressive position. The problem is they can't use force necessarily right now, because all that could do is light a fuse that could expand the conflict in the Middle East to a much broader regional conflict. And quite frankly, the U.S. allies do not necessarily want an expanded area of conflict outside of what's already taking place in Gaza. So this is a very delicate balancing act that we're seeing out of Washington. Yes, the simple answer is yes. They want to see and view the U.S. as, for lack of a better term, the bad guy in the region. They want to expel the bad actors that they see the United States is in the region and the role that they play in the region. They would love nothing more than to push US interests out of the Middle East, and in particular, out of the Kurdish region and out of the regions in Syria. They would love for this to be a black eye on US foreign policy as it relates to Israel and their position on the conflict in Gaza. The reality is that the governmental leadership in Tehran may be overplaying their hand by using illegal, aggressive actions to show the issue, or to highlight the issue of the U.S. is the presence that is causing all this conflict. Their belief is that if they push the U.S. out, there will be broad peace and they'll be able to destroy Israel. The U.S. is not going to allow that to happen. At the same time, the U.S. is not going to allow the continued unprovoked attacks against a civilian population that has done nothing to bring these actions to bear on themselves. The U.S. should not and will not allow this to stand. The question is, what tactics is Washington and the Biden administration going to take to have this be a deterrence for Iran taking further action similar to this? That's a question I don't think even Washington has right now. I think that the situation in the region is so fluid and